Good morning, everybody. As previous speakers have noted, there's something like 250,000 electric vehicles on British roads. That might sound quite a large number, but it's still a small fraction of the total vehicle population, about 1%. And it gets a bit worse than that, because of those vehicles, only a relatively small part are pure electric. We still have a lot of plug-in hybrids. And for me, the future is the fully electric, the full battery electric vehicle. Now, I often fall into the trap of thinking that electric vehicles means private cars. And indeed, private cars form a very large fraction of electric vehicles, but there are other important categories too. Buses, delivery vans, electric refuse collection vehicles, electric scooters, electric motorbikes, and so on. Now, the government would like us to have more electric vehicles on the road as in the future. And what's behind that, I don't think anybody's yet mentioned this in this session. It varies between two good things. One is air quality. We know that older diesel engines emit a lot of particles, so city air quality is an issue. Cities would like to have more electric vehicles from that point of view. And the other is reduction in the emissions of CO2. That, of course, is predicated on being able to generate electricity at a low carbon dioxide emission intensity. We slightly brush under the carpet the embedded CO2 that would be in all these new electric vehicles. There are a couple of pictures there of different charging points. If you're fortunate enough to be a Tesla owner, you have very nice charging stations around the country. The middle one is, I think it's Chargemasters offering in Milton Keynes, and there is an Ecotricity post. The first statement is kind of the blindingly obvious. If you have a fully electric vehicle, you've got to charge it. It's kind of obvious. My second proposition is that we don't yet know exactly where or exactly how fast people will want to charge. We've only got 1% of the vehicles on the road. We're starting to see some patterns from electric vehicle chargers. But would you like to project your future business models from a relatively small fraction of users who are often enthusiastic early adopters? You might charge at home, you might charge at work, you might charge en route, and we're starting to see, as mentioned earlier, maybe tie-ins between certain pub chains and charging points, or supermarkets and charging point companies. So what about charging at home? I was fortunate enough to be lent a Nissan Leaf, the white car there, by Chargemaster, and I'm lucky I have somewhere at home where I can charge. There is the former chairman of Chargemaster having his Tesla charged at home. Home charging is relatively slow, as we'll see, but it's convenient if you have somewhere to charge the car. If you live in an inner urban area of Victorian terraces, you wonder about dribbling the cable across the pavement, street clutter, and so on. So it's not so attractive. There's my Chargemaster charger, and the Tesla, you can see the green battery is really quite full, but you probably can't read that it's got another 8 hours of charging. That is the 3.7 kilowatt home charger. But we've heard earlier that most people, most days, don't drive more than 20 miles, so maybe this slow charging is great for people who commute to work by the electric car. You can go to 7.7 kilowatts. 11 kilowatts starts to spook the distribution network operating companies. So there is an issue there, but if you've got home charging, well, a lot of people seem to do that. One interesting pattern that I'm told is emerging is that those who get an electric car through their company are reluctant to charge at home because they could charge somewhere else and charge the charging to the company and not to their own electricity bill. So you get these sort of curious patterns that start to emerge. Or you can charge at work, on the move, and we've heard about that. And there are some challenges there. If you're an installer, you've got to work out where to put them. There are various modeling systems, so you can see where there are perhaps needs for chargers. And can you get the electricity at the sites? And I'm not a businessman, but other speakers have talked about the business model in that you've got to lay out these charge points where you think people might want to use them, and you sink a lot of money into this. And I think it's probably no secret that ChargeMaster didn't make any money, but obviously my friend Mr. Martel did rather well out of selling the company to BP. And if you're a user, and this has been mentioned, I use the word incompatibility. I think that's not the right word. I've been criticized for that. It's just that if you go to a charge point, you get out your spread of RFID cards, your contactless cards, and you fiddle around, and it's dark, and you can't quite see the charge number, and it just gets a bit irritating and a bit painful. And contactless was mentioned, but you might pay more for the electricity if you're using contactless than if you're signed up to some kind of subscription deal. And I was talking to the gentleman in the cloakroom, and he pointed out the blindingly obvious. It'd be just really nice if you could pay with one card to whichever company is involved, and that was seamless, just like you pay for your petrol or diesel at the petrol station. The ZAP map's been quoted a few times earlier today. Fast charging, I use these terms very loosely, and rapid charging up to 120 kilowatts. Now you might wonder, why am I talking about charging in miles per hour? It might seem an odd thing. That's how many additional range miles you're adding by charging. So, for example, if you're on a 50 kilowatt fast charger, you can be putting about 150 miles in for every hour that you sit at the charge point. That's not too bad until you remember that when you're charging a lot of vehicle batteries, particularly with fast chargers or really fast chargers, okay, the initial charge rate is very high, but as the battery fills up, the charge rate has to be backed off because the battery's saying, I can't take this. I need to keep my terminal voltage under control. Nevertheless, we can do that, and we can see a rollout of chargers. I have a completely and utterly bogus statistic here, which you shouldn't take away. If you average the number of connectors on charge points in the UK, it's nearly 1 per mile of main road, but we know they're not spread out like that. And also, I use the word connector, because when you go to a charge point, you've got to decide whether it's CCS or whether it's CHAdeMO, or of course Tesla has a different connector again. And my Nissan had a boot full of cables so that you could connect to different chargers. Nevertheless, as other speakers have pointed out, we're not doing too badly in the UK, and brave companies have sunk a lot of money into building these charging networks. Another aspect which has been touched on is impacts on the electricity system. There are lots of sort of excitable comments from people about, oh, if we plug all the cars in, the lights will go out, and all sorts of nonsense like that. Essentially, there is no issue, at least for the foreseeable future, at the generation level, and probably not much at a grid level. The grid has some really big problems to deal with, like the integration of more renewables, like the decarbonisation of heating, which are going to cause real challenges to the grid. Plugging in electrical vehicles, unless everybody plugged them in at the same time in the evening, is not a generation issue, so we can park that. But it can be an issue at distribution level, and I'm probably being a little bit harsh on the distribution companies by saying I think many of them wish they'd never heard of electric vehicles, because it just messes up their business model. They have all these cables, they get some nice income from the use of the electricity system. Why do they want all these people adding all these new loads all over the place and causing trouble? A few of them are starting to think about it. But distribution assets, like their substation, are often quite old, not necessarily well documented, and if you have a nice leafy street in Solihull and everybody starts getting electric cars, that street has a bit of a problem if everybody plugs in at the same time. Well, maybe we can get round that in other ways. We worked with a company called ZapInamo to help on a car park near Heathrow where there wasn't a strong electricity supply to that car park, and we put some batteries in. And the batteries supported charging at peak times. And so you could think, well, maybe I want to do a rapid charge at home because I've just come home, I want to get the car full, I want to go off, so I'll have a battery pack in my garage, which I can charge slowly over the day, but when I come home, I can charge maybe at 50 kilowatts like a rapid charger. Maybe there's a market for that option. We did look at delivery depots and so on in terms of reinforcing the supply of batteries. And a few people are getting into that space. And if you get excited, you can start saying, well, we integrate solar, there's V2G lurking out there as well, and all sorts of things that we could do. Finally, maybe in the future, it isn't going to be plug-in charging. I mean, do you really enjoy, those of you who drive electric cars, in the rain, a wet cable, you've got to get out of the car, plug the thing in, fiddle with the charging post? Is that really the best we can do? On the right there is an option that actually has been around for a long time, battery swap, like changing horses in the days of stagecoaches. Not, I think, really practical for cars because of the way the batteries are built in. Might make sense for delivery vehicles, might make sense for public service vehicles. And then on the left, what about inductive or wireless charging? You put some coils in the street, you drive your car over it, the power is coupled in wirelessly. You know, some people might not want to get out, say at night, in the rain. The chief of one of our projects said, but I've just had my hair done. I don't want to go out in the rain to mess around coupling the cars up to a charging point. So why do we do that? Those who are physically less able might not want to be struggling with cables to plug in. If you go to Milton Keynes, bus route 7, you can see inductive charging going. We could, for example, think of electrifying along the whole length of a road, putting coils all the way along a lane of a motorway and charging as we go, which completely eliminates the need for all this rapid charging. Now, the numbers are pretty eye-watering for doing that. In my group, we have two unquantifiably large sums of money. One is the Hinkley Point, the other is the HS2. And we think for about 2 or 3 HS2s or 2 or 3 Hinkley Points, we could actually electrify many of the country's trunk roads. I'm not sure that will happen, but it does give us something that we could think about. And it might be the solution to the electrification of heavy freight, unless there are real advances in batteries. So to conclude, as others, perhaps one of the bigger barriers to going electric is the first cost of electric vehicles for like-for-like performance. Tesla's a great car, but you can get a car which will go not quite as fast, but almost as fast, for a lot less money. Nissan Leaf, nice car, but you can get a cheaper car, a diesel car. But the prices are coming down, so that's all good. And I think we'll see a lot more cars. There's also, people call it range anxiety, range confidence, I like that. I would say just general unfamiliarity. If you've not driven an electric car, you've not experienced charge rage, you've not experienced the incompatibility of systems, but you have, you do learn that it is a great drive, and that's a great thing. And finally, just to put a little black cloud on the horizon, what happens when the government seriously starts to lose revenue from fuel duty? Will you tax electricity for charging higher? Don't know. I'll leave that slightly negative thought, but I look forward to a more electric future.